Hi, and thanks for tuning in to the GREENSTAGRAM podcast. This is me, Prateek, and we have on our line Chinyao, my teammate, and we have Meghna Vodapalli with us, our guest for the night. Meghna works for an organization called Sahas on a project which is in partnership with the UNICEF as a technical consultant to the Telangana government on rural waste management. Hi, Meghna. Thanks for joining us.
Hi guys, thank you so much for having me.
We'd just like to know a little bit about you. What do you do, and what does your organization do?
Okay, so basically SARS is an NGO, it's a non-government organization, and we offer waste management consultancy and expertise to several ULBs and governments essentially across India.
Okay.
So the idea is to kind of implement holistic waste management in rural areas and in the cities and towns of India to kind of ensure that, waste doesn't end up in landfills, but rather gets recovered. And that
needs most attention, because we're trying to talk about one of the issues that's really, probably the most pressing issue in India right now, which is the new controversial EIA draft. So, that's obviously one. We would like to talk a little bit more on that. But what do you think is another, one, big issue which needs, immediate response or immediate action?
Right. So, Pradeep, basically, 2020 is being looked at as the year that allows us to kind of reset how we do things, right?
Yeah.
Not just in terms of the healthcare systems or our education systems. It's essentially the year that that's gotten a pandemic that's kind of bringing out all the cracks in our society, all the existing cracks, and now you can really see the flaws coming out.
Yeah.
So this is basically considered the year where we can really set things right. And right now in India, I feel like the government's being extremely short-sighted. Short-sighted. They're not looking at the long-term impact of the things that they're doing. So essentially, this would be the year that they kind of look at ensuring a green recovery when you're coming out of this recession, the pandemic-induced recession.
Right. So, but surprisingly, sorry to cut you, but surprisingly, that's exactly the opposite that's happening, don't you think? That's exactly what we want to talk about tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So EIA, of course, which we will get to in a bit, is a big example of how the government's being completely short-sighted. They're not looking at kind of, they're not looking at fulfilling their climate action policies and initiatives.
Right.
And another thing that they're doing is actually putting out auctions for coal, which is terrible. Like, this is not the time to, auction out coal. They're essentially supposed to be investing in renewable energy and kind of making that industry easy to sort of work with. But yeah, I mean, that's another pressing issue. But yeah, coming to EIA, we can
probably start with it, because this is right now the biggest, talking point, I would say, not just for any environmentalist or an organization or a green group. I just generally think it should be for everyone. Like you and I, probably because we're working and we're studying in the field of environmental management, we know a little bit more about it. But, it's something that I think everyone should be concerned about. And so there's something known as an Environment Protection Act in India, which started in 1986. This was following the Bhopal gas tragedy, one of the worst man-made disasters apparently, and it happened in 1984. And that's when the Indian government at the time, made a decision that things need to change, and the environmental, acts which were in place really need reform. So they came up with the Environmental Protection Act in 1986. Under that was something known as an EIA, and EIA stands for Environmental Impact Assessment. It's basically a process for all projects. It could be, a coal mine, it could be construction of a chemical plant, which the Bhopal gas plant was, and things like highways, anything. So all these projects before they start, they need to have an assessment on the impacts to check for their if they have any negative impacts on the environment. Once a project is decided to happen, they have to go through a whole procedure, which involves something like a public consultation. Suppose you're living in the land where the proposed project is going to take place. You, as the public, as a concerned member of the public, can appeal against it. So you're giving 30 days. That's what it stated before. You're giving 30 days for public consultation. I mean, once the whole thing is gone to the government and it's out for public consultation, there are meetings as well. You can write emails, you can SMS, you can call on the helpline number. So you can basically, appeal against this and you can get it changed. But what I'm hearing, things like, so after that, obviously after public consultation comes the EC, the environment cert, basically the clearance, which gives the project a go ahead. But now things are changing. There is something known as an environmental protection, the Environmental Impact Assessment 2020, which is a controversial draft, if I may say. So we want to know a little bit about, so a lot of people don't know about this, Meghna. It's just come up in the news. Everyone is talking about it, but everyone's not talking about it also. So what is this new environment impact assessment law, which is coming into force?
Yeah. So, okay, generally when the government wants to kind of revise existing laws, right, they put out new drafts of for a particular section of that law, or they either want to kind of revise the entire law, so they put out drafts for the entire law itself. So this is merely a draft. It's been put out in April 2020. Okay. And generally when the government wants to revise a certain law, it puts out a draft for public review, feedback, and consultation. So they basically take the feedback of experts and even, commoners across the country to see if everybody's okay with a certain draft. Only then can they notify it and actually make it a law. So the EIA draft of 2020 is actually, it's been really controversial because it kind of dilutes several procedures that come under the impact assessment, of any environmental, or rather any project that has any sort of environmental impact. There are a bunch of changes that the draft has suggested, one of them being that it allows complete exemption for several projects from conducting an impact assessment on the communities or the environment or the area around that particular project. So for instance, I'm setting up a new thermal power plant, and the earlier impact assessment law required me to do a certain, follow a certain procedure and, sort of assess the impact of that particular thermal plant on the surrounding area. This new draft does not, or rather it dilutes the process, number one. It doesn't say that the impact assessment has to follow procedures 1 to 20. It rather just says maybe 1 to 5 and you can get away with it. You can kind of get a clearance for putting up the thermal power plant. Or it even allows, it completely gives me an exemption from even conducting an assessment in certain cases for certain sectors. Yeah. So the logic behind actually introducing such, such drastic changes in the impact assessment requirements is that the government actually wants to push for ease of business right now.
That's it, right.
Which is, but that's pathetic because, ease of business does not essentially mean that we go around destroying our environment. I mean, we have to move towards a sustainable society. And this is basically just doing the opposite of that. It does not require you to do any sort of an assessment on the environment, which is, completely the opposite direction of what the entire international community is moving.
The whole Environment Protection Act came into force after one of the worst disasters, the Bhopal gas tragedy. So, that's the reason this came into force. So this is just a recipe for disaster, honestly, because if they do these changes, disasters can also increase. What do you think? We could honestly see another disaster. Like even recently in this year itself, we had this gas leak.
Exactly. Absolutely. Actually, speaking of gas leak, this is again going back to the EIA. So essentially that was responsible for the gas leak. The main reason it even happened was because they put in place, they didn't follow certain environmental norms and procedures and standards, right?
So it was given without an environmental clearance? This went ahead without clearance?
Yeah, actually, they were actually working, they had machines and mechanisms that didn't really adhere to the environmental norms. And that was despite a strict, or rather a relatively strict environmental impact assessment process that was set out earlier. So right now the EIA, the new EIA draft actually, it facilitates mechanisms legitimize actions that are currently listed as violations.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that if a company like LG Polymers is getting away with faulty mechanisms and that have led to gas leaks like the one in Vizag. Right. Now, with the new draft, they'll actually be able to, these violations won't even be violations anymore. They'll actually be legit processes for them to follow, and we won't even be able to hold these companies accountable for any sort of environmental disasters. So that is another reason why the new EIA draft is absolutely horrific. I mean, everybody is just losing their mind over it.
I'm sure. How do you think? How else can we help us? I mean, if you could tell us a little bit more about, how could we as normal citizens of this country can express our concern for this EIA draft?
I think that the most basic thing that someone can do is to kind of send out an email to the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change to start with. Okay. Because that's really, I mean, that's the first step, you've got, that's definitely the first step because, okay, so I don't know if you guys, you've probably read it, the consultation given for the 30th of June, and there was a massive outcry against this draft, right? Exactly. So a lot of people sent out mails for an extension at least. So right now the public feedback, the period's been extended to the 11th of August. So okay, the more, August. Okay,
so we have less than a month basically.
Exactly, but the fact is that the number of emails that have been sent out till now, they were actually successful in extending this 30th June deadline to. So yeah, definitely emails can make a big difference. I mean, you might think that how what difference can one email make? But like if so many, like thousands and thousands of us send out emails, it's actually helped in even extending the deadline. So that itself is a very big achievement to start with. So, if more and more of us send out emails and, kind of spread the word as well, like, talk about it with your family, with your friends, make people aware that this is a problem, and the thing is, because it's environment related, it hasn't come into, it hasn't been discussed too much by mainstream media, which is again, so let's kind of take up the onus on ourselves to make people around us aware. So even if you talk about it with 5 people and they talk about it with 5 people in turn, I mean, you're just kind of making it the talk of the town. So
that's what
absolutely. And ultimately, I mean, this is a democracy and the government will listen to what the people want.
Our listeners, a little bit about the email. I mean, how can you contact the Ministry of Environment? So there's an email ID. It's EIA 2020-MOEFCC@gov.in. You can send your emails to this ID. It can be a very short email, just your concern. You're a concerned member of the public. That's how I put my mail. And that's the thing, we live in a democracy, like Meghna said, and being a citizen of this country is being the most powerful person in this country. You all of us actually can bring about a change that even no opposition, no one person can, but the public can. And we need to get to this. Just think about this for a moment. For tomorrow, there's actually minerals found near your house, and the government's going to give a green signal, and they're going to construct a chemical plant there. God forbid, there is an incident minutely similar to any of the incidents we spoke about before. Generations will be suffering. People from Bhopal, around the area where the Bhopal gas tragedy happened, are still suffering. You can look it up. It's 2020, man. It's 40 years since that year, almost. And basically, we just need to stop this. Thanks for joining us, Meghna. This has been a great conversation. We've got to learn so much about this.
It was a pleasure.
And I think we can bring about a change, and we should start now. Okay, thank you so much for listening to us. We'll have another one very soon. Thank you.